The stars had never seemed so cold as Ambassador Kira Vasquez as they did from the observation deck of the Terran diplomatic vessel Infinite Patience. She pressed her palm against the reinforced glass, feeling the chill of the void seep through despite the layers of insulation. Beyond the viewport, the massive station of the Galactic Concordance rotated slowly, its crystalline spires catching the light of 3 distant suns.
Ambassador, the Council is ready for you.
Kira turned to face her aide, a young man named Chen Wei, whose perpetually calm demeanor belied the anxiety in his eyes. She smoothed her formal diplomatic attire, a deep blue suit adorned with the golden sun emblem of the Terran Union, and nodded.
Then let's not keep them waiting.
The walk through the station's corridors felt longer than it should have. Kira had made this journey dozens of times over the past 3 years as humanity's primary representative to the Galactic Concordance. She knew every twist and turn, every viewport that offered glimpses of docked vessels from 100 different species. Yet today, something felt different. The other beings they passed seemed to avoid her gaze more than usual.
Conversations died as she approached, replaced by the soft whisper of a dozen alien languages.
The council chamber was a marvel of xenoengineering, a vast dome that could accommodate representatives from all 347 member species of the Concordance. Floating platforms adjusted automatically to provide optimal comfort for beings of every size and physiology. The air was a carefully calibrated mixture that most species found tolerable, if not comfortable. Kira's platform carried her to the center of the chamber, where a single pillar of light marked the speaking position. She had stood here before, advocating for humanity's interests, negotiating trade agreements, and defending Earth's right to expand into the unclaimed systems bordering their territory. But today's summons had come without explanation, and that alone was cause for concern.
High Arbiter Vel'thari, a being who resembled nothing so much as a towering crystal formation with bioluminescent veins, addressed the chamber in a voice that seemed to resonate from everywhere at once.
This emergency session of the Galactic Concordance is now called to order. Ambassador Vasquez of the Terran Union, you have been summoned to answer charges brought against your species by the Vorthak Dominion.
Kira's blood ran cold. The Vorthak were one of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy, a race of massive, chitinous beings whose empire had spread across 1,000 worlds before humanity had even invented fire. They had watched humanity's rapid expansion with barely concealed contempt, referring to humans as the infestation in diplomatic communications they thought were private.
From a platform across the chamber, a Vorthak representative rose. Admiral Crixoth was enormous even by the standards of his species, his obsidian carapace marked with the ceremonial scarring of 100 military campaigns. When he spoke, his mandibles clicked in a rhythm that the translation implant in Kira's ear converted into harsh, guttural words.
The Vorthak Dominion charges the human species with the following crimes against galactic peace: unauthorized military expansion into contested territories, unprovoked aggression against Dominion vessels, and the theft of proprietary technology from Vorthak research facilities.
Kira kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. These charges were absurd. She knew of no such incidents. Either the Vorthak were fabricating evidence to justify an action they had already planned, or something had gone terribly wrong somewhere in human space without her knowledge. I request details of these alleged incidents, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement system.
Admiral Crixoth's compound eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. Your species established a military outpost in the Kepler 442 system, which falls within Vorthak territorial claims. When our patrol vessels approached to investigate, they were fired upon without warning. Furthermore, we have evidence that human agents infiltrated our research station in the Arcturus sector and stole classified data regarding our defensive technologies.
The Kepler 442 system was surveyed and claimed by Terran exploration vessels over 40 years ago, Kira responded. We have documented evidence of this claim that predates any Vorthak presence in the region by decades. As for your other accusations, I have no knowledge of any such incidents and request to see the evidence you claim to possess.
Irrelevant, Crixoth snapped. Human claims are meaningless. Your species is young, weak, and insignificant. The Dominion has controlled that region of space since before your ancestors climbed down from the trees. We do not recognize any territorial claims made by humanity anywhere in the galaxy.
A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. This was unprecedented, a direct challenge not just to a specific incident, but to humanity's very right to exist as a spacefaring civilization.
High Arbiter Vel'thari pulsed with agitated light. Admiral Crixoth, such statements are highly irregular. The Terran Union has been a recognized member of the Concordance for 53 galactic standard years. Their territorial claims have been registered and accepted according to established protocols.
Protocols established by species who feared humanity's potential, Crixoth replied. We have indulged this experiment in human civilization long enough. The Vorthak Dominion formally challenges humanity's honor and fitness to exist among the stars. We invoke the ancient right of HFY, total war without restriction or mercy, until one species is utterly defeated. The chamber erupted in chaos. HFY was an archaic concept from before the founding of the Concordance, a declaration of existential conflict that had driven countless species to extinction in the dark ages of galactic history. It had not been invoked in over 10,000 years.
Kira stood motionless as the uproar washed over her. She understood now why the corridors had been so quiet, why the other species had avoided her gaze. Word had spread that this moment was coming, and they all expected humanity to crumble before the might of the Vorthak Dominion.
They expected her to beg for mercy, to offer concessions, to do anything to avoid the destruction of her entire civilization. They didn't know humans very well.
I accept, Kira said, her voice cutting through the chaos with the clarity of a blade. Silence fell like a physical weight. Every eye in the chamber, and there were thousands, in configurations ranging from single orbs to clustered multitudes, turned to focus on the human ambassador.
You accept? Admiral Crixoth seemed genuinely taken aback. You do not seem to understand what HFY means, human. There will be no negotiation, no surrender. We will hunt your kind across every world you have infested until the last human child is nothing but ash.
I understand perfectly, Kira said, and I accept on behalf of the Terran Union. You have challenged humanity's honor and our right to exist. We do not take such challenges lightly. But before we proceed, I want to ensure that the historical record is absolutely clear. She turned to address the full council. The Vorthak Dominion has, without legitimate provocation, declared existential war on a peaceful member species of the Galactic Concordance.
We asked for evidence of our alleged crimes, and were offered none. We were willing to negotiate, to find common ground, and were met with threats of genocide. Let the galaxy witness that humanity did not seek this conflict, but let the galaxy also witness that we will not shy away from it.
She turned back to face Crixoth directly. You speak of hunting us across every world. You speak of reducing our children to ash. Know this, Admiral. Humanity has been fighting wars of survival since before we had words to describe them. We fought each other for resources, for ideology, for honor. We developed weapons of unimaginable destructive power, and then we developed the wisdom to restrain ourselves from using them. We climbed out of our gravity well through sheer bloody-minded determination, and we spread across the stars, because that is what we do. We survive, we endure, we overcome. Her voice rose, filling the chamber with a passion that made several nearby delegates instinctively recoil. You think you know war. You fight with your claws and your ships and your ancient tactics unchanged for millennia.
Humanity reinvents the art of killing every generation. We have spent our entire existence as a species learning better ways to destroy our enemies while protecting our own. You want to challenge our honor? You want to threaten our children? Come then.
Come and learn why the universe should have been terrified when we first looked up at the stars and decided they belonged to us.
Admiral Cricksoft's mandibles clicked in what Kira had learned to recognize as a Vorthak expression of approval. Finally, a human with spirit. Your courage will make your species' extinction all the more entertaining. The HFY begins at the next galactic cycle.
"We'll be ready," Kira said. "We've always been ready."
The message reached Earth 17 minutes after Kira transmitted it, practically instantaneous by galactic standards, thanks to the quantum entanglement relay network that humanity had established across their territory. Secretary General Marcus Webb received it in his office at Terran Command, a sprawling complex buried beneath the Swiss Alps that served as the nerve center of humanity's interstellar civilization.
He read the message 3 times before calling an emergency session of the Terran Defense Council. Within an hour, representatives from every major human government, military command, and scientific institution had gathered, either in person or via holographic projection, in the primary conference chamber. The mood was grim but focused. This was not the first existential threat humanity had faced, though it was certainly the most direct. "Ladies and gentlemen," Secretary General Webb began, "approximately 90 minutes ago, the Vorthak Dominion formally declared HFY, total war without restriction, against the human species. Ambassador Vasquez accepted the challenge on our behalf. We have 1 galactic cycle, roughly 48 Earth hours, before hostilities officially begin." "What are we dealing with?" asked Admiral Yuki Tanaka, commander of the Terran Navy's 3rd Fleet. "I've reviewed the Vorthak's known military capabilities, but intelligence on their actual strength has always been limited." "That's because they haven't fought a real war in over 3,000 years, said Dr. Heinrich Müller, head of the Strategic Analysis Division. "The last species to seriously challenge them were the Priaxi, and that conflict ended with the complete extinction of the Priaxi homeworld. But that was before the Concordance, before the era of galactic peace. The Vorthak have been resting on their laurels while we've been innovating."
Don't underestimate them, cautioned General Yu Chen, commander of the Terran Marines. They may not have fought recently, but they've maintained a standing fleet that outnumbers ours by at least 50 to 1. Their individual ships are larger and more heavily armed than anything we've deployed. And they have 3,000 years of accumulated military infrastructure across 1,000 worlds.
50 to 1 odds? Admiral Tanaka smiled grimly. "We've faced worse."
With respect, Admiral, when exactly did humanity face odds worse than 50 to 1 at a species-wide scale?
Fair point, but the principle stands. We've always been outnumbered, outgunned, and underestimated, and we've always found a way.
Secretary General Webb raised a hand to quiet the crosstalk. "We can discuss strategy in detail later. Right now, I need to understand our immediate options. Dr. Muller, what do we know about Vorthak's psychology? Is there any way to de-escalate before this becomes a full-scale war?"
Dr. Mueller shook his head. HFY is considered sacred among the Vorthak. To them, it's not just a military action, it's a religious obligation. Once declared, it cannot be rescinded except through complete victory or utter defeat. There is no middle ground.
"Then we fight," said a new voice.
Everyone turned to look at the holographic projection that had just flickered to life at the end of the table. The figure was that of an elderly woman, her silver hair cropped short, and her bearing unmistakably military, despite her civilian clothes.
Marshal Victoria Chen was nominally retired, but as the architect of humanity's victory in the siege of Proxima Centauri, the only time humans had faced a hostile alien species before, her counsel was sought whenever the survival of the species was at stake.
"Marshal Chen," Secretary General Webb said with visible relief, "thank you for joining us. Your input would be invaluable."
I've been monitoring the situation since Ambassador Vasquez's message arrived, the Marshal said. I've also taken the liberty of reaching out to some old contacts in the intelligence community. The picture they're painting is concerning, but not hopeless.
Please, share what you've learned.
The Vorthak have been planning this for years, possibly decades. They've been slowly repositioning their fleet elements to surround human space without triggering any alarm. By my estimates, we'll be facing coordinated strikes on at least 30 of our systems simultaneously when the HFY begins.
30 systems at once? General Liu paled. We don't have the ships to defend even half that many.
No, we don't, which is why we won't try.
A murmur ran through the assembled leaders. Marshal Chen continued before anyone could voice an objection.
The Vorthak expect us to scatter our forces, to try to protect every colony, every station, every civilian population. They're counting on our compassion, dated their gains.
You're suggesting we abandon our own people? Admiral Tanaka's voice was sharp with anger.
I'm suggesting we think strategically. We can't save everyone by defending everywhere, but we can save everyone by winning the war. And to do that, we need to concentrate our forces, choose our battles, and strike where they least expect it.
Where would that be? Secretary General Webb asked.
Marshal Chen's holographic form smiled, a cold expression that promised violence. The Vorthak's homeworld, Vorthak's prime. The chamber erupted in protests and exclamations. The Vorthak homeworld was the most heavily defended position in their entire empire, protected by orbital fortresses, automated defense systems, and the bulk of their home fleet. Attacking it would be suicide.
Hear me out, Marshal Chen said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The Vorthak have spent millennia building their defensive infrastructure around a single assumption, that any enemy would follow the traditional pattern of galactic warfare. They would engage in the outer systems first, gradually working their way inward over years or decades of campaigning. By the time an enemy reached Vorthak's prime, they would be exhausted, their supply lines stretched thin, easy to defeat.
And you want us to skip the entire process and strike directly at their heart, Secretary General Webb said slowly. They won't expect it because it's insane.
It's not insane, it's audacious. There's a difference. Marshal Chen manipulated her holographic controls, bringing up a star map that showed the relative positions of human and Vorthak space. Human FTL technology is faster than anything the Vorthak have. It's one of the few areas where we have a clear technological advantage. If we launch immediately, we can have a strike force at Vorthak's prime before they even begin their attacks on our systems.
What kind of strike force are we talking about? Admiral Tanaka asked, her skepticism giving way to tactical interest.
Everything we have, every ship, every soldier, every weapon. We leave only skeleton crews to manage essential civilian evacuation in our home systems. We bet everything on a single, decisive action.
And if we fail?
Then humanity dies. But humanity dies anyway if we play by their rules. At least this way, we die fighting. We die making them pay for every single human life they've taken. We die reminding the galaxy that humans never go quietly.
The chamber fell silent as the weight of the decision settled on every person present. This was not a choice that could be made by committee or voted on by representatives. This was a choice that would determine the fate of 20 billion human beings across dozens of worlds. Secretary General Webb stood slowly, his face aged by the burden of what he was about to say. I need everyone in this room to understand something. I am about to authorize the most audacious military operation in human history. I am about to send our entire military force on a mission that may well be a one-way trip. And I am doing this because I believe it is the only way to save our species.
He looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every person and every holographic projection present. Does anyone here object? Does anyone believe there is a better option?
No one spoke.
Then it's decided. Admiral Tanaka, you have operational command. Marshal Chen, I'm asking you to come out of retirement to serve as strategic advisor. General Liu, coordinate with civilian authorities for immediate evacuation protocols. Dr. Mueller, I want every scrap of intelligence we have on Vorthax Prime's defenses compiled and distributed to the fleet within the hour.
Yes, sir, came the chorus of responses.
One more thing, Secretary General Webb said. I want a message broadcast to every human settlement, every ship, every station. I want everyone to know what's happening and what we're doing about it. No secrets, no sugarcoating. If we're going to ask humanity to put everything on the line, they deserve to know why. What should the message say? Asked the communications director, a young woman named Patel, who had been silent throughout the meeting.
Tell them the truth. Tell them that an alien empire has challenged our right to exist. Tell them that we're going to answer that challenge the only way humans know how, by fighting back with everything we have. Tell them to be brave, to be strong, to remember who we are and what we've overcome. And tell them, he paused, his voice catching slightly, tell them that no matter what happens, we will never surrender. We will never submit. We are humanity, and we do not go gently into any night.
The mobilization that followed was unlike anything in human history. Within hours of the Secretary General's announcement, the entire machinery of human civilization had pivoted toward a single purpose: war. Factories that had been producing consumer goods shifted to military production. Scientists abandoned their research to work on weapons systems. Civilians lined up at recruitment centers, offering their services in any capacity. Even children collected scrap metal and recyclables, convinced that they were contributing to the defense of their species.
But the most remarkable transformation happened in the military itself.
Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Will, flagship of the combined human fleet, and watched as ships from every corner of human space converged on the rendezvous point. Heavy battle cruisers from Earth, fast attack carriers from the Alpha Centauri shipyards, missile platforms from the Tau Ceti defense grid, and hundreds of smaller vessels from colonies and outposts throughout human territory. It wasn't enough. By any objective measure, the fleet gathering before her was still vastly outnumbered and outgunned by the forces of the Vorthak Dominion. But as she watched ship after ship drop out of FTL, she felt something that transcended mere numbers: pride.
Admiral, we've received confirmation from all fleet elements, her executive officer reported. 2,417 combat vessels are now on station. Additionally, we have 1,200 support ships, 300 hospital ships, and 97 specialized operations craft.
And the crews?
Approximately 3.2 million naval personnel, plus another 800,000 Marines and ground forces. Sir, we also have an additional 40,000 volunteers who have come forward in the last few hours. Civilians with skills that might be useful. Engineers, doctors, even some former military personnel who wanted to re-enlist.
Admiral Tanaka nodded slowly. Find places for all of them. We'll need every hand we can get.
She turned as the door to her bridge opened, admitting Marshal Chen. The elderly strategist moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent decades in lower gravity, but her eyes were sharp and alert.
Marshal, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Admiral. I've reviewed the updated intelligence on Vorthax Prime. The situation is worse than we initially estimated.
Of course it is. Please, share the bad news.
Marshal Chen manipulated her personal holographic projector, bringing up a detailed map of the Vorthax homeworld and its defenses. Vorthax Prime is protected by 16 orbital fortresses, each roughly the size of a small moon. Their combined firepower could theoretically destroy our entire fleet in under an hour. Additionally, the home fleet, which we estimate at approximately 40,000 vessels, is positioned in a defensive sphere around the planet.
And that's not counting the automated defense platforms, the ground-based anti-orbital batteries, or the population of 12 billion Vorthak, each of whom is essentially a walking weapon.
You're not exactly inspiring confidence, Marshal.
I'm not trying to inspire confidence. I'm trying to ensure you understand the scope of the challenge.
Because what I'm about to propose is going to sound insane, and I need you to know that I'm not underestimating our enemy.
Admiral Tanaka gestured for her to continue. The Vorthak defense of their homeworld is based on a fundamental assumption that any attacking force will approach through conventional vectors and engage in a conventional battle. They expect their enemy to trade shots with their fortresses, to try to pick apart their defensive grid piece by piece. What they don't expect, what no one in the galaxy would expect, is for an attacking force to bypass their defenses entirely.
And how exactly do you propose we do that?
Marshal Chen's smile was unsettling. We're going to jump directly into Vorthak's Prime's atmosphere.
Admiral Tanaka stared at her for a long moment. That's impossible. FTL drives can't operate inside a gravity well that strong. The ships would be torn apart.
Conventional FTL drives, yes. But our engineers have been working on something unconventional. She brought up a new schematic, a modification to the standard FTL drive that Tanaka had never seen before. We call it the Hammer Protocol. It's a modification that allows a ship to make a single short-range FTL jump while partially inside a gravity well. The stress on the ship is enormous. Most vessels wouldn't survive the attempt.
But our newer ships, the ones built in the last decade, have reinforced hulls and redundant systems that give them a fighting chance.
A fighting chance isn't the same as certainty.
No, it isn't. I estimate we'll lose between 30 and 40% of our ships just from the jump itself. But the ships that survive will emerge directly in Vorthak Prime's upper atmosphere, behind all of their orbital defenses. The fortresses won't be able to fire on us without hitting their own planet. The automated platforms will be useless, and the home fleet will have to scramble to respond to an attack coming from completely unexpected direction.
Admiral Tanaka was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. You're asking me to sacrifice a third of my fleet before the battle even begins.
I'm asking you to sacrifice a third of your fleet to give the rest a chance to win. Without this, we're just throwing ourselves against their defenses until we're all dead. This way, we might actually accomplish something.
And what exactly are we trying to accomplish? Even if we get through the defenses, we're not going to be able to destroy an entire planet. We don't have that kind of firepower.
We don't need to destroy the planet. We just need to threaten it. Marshal Chen's expression was grim but determined. The Vorthak have ruled their empire through fear for thousands of years. They've never faced a real challenge, never felt truly threatened. If we can put a gun to their homeworld's head, if we can make them believe that we're capable of destroying everything they've built, they'll negotiate. They'll have to.
And if they don't? If they call our bluff?
Then we won't be bluffing. She brought up another file, this one marked with the highest level of classification. I've been in contact with the Special Weapons Division. They've confirmed that we have the capability to do what needs to be done. The question is whether we're willing to do it.
Admiral Tanaka read the file in silence. Her face revealed nothing, but her hand trembled slightly as she scrolled through the technical specifications. "The Hammer of God," she whispered. "I thought this was mothballed after the last war."
It was, but it was never dismantled, and the warheads are still viable.
You're talking about genocide, the complete destruction of a sapient species.
I'm talking about survival. Our survival. Marshal Chen's voice was gentle but implacable. The Vorthak have declared their intention to exterminate humanity down to the last child. They're not bluffing. They've done it before. To the Prakathi and half a dozen other species we've only learned about through archaeological remains. If we show mercy, if we hold back, they will destroy us. Not because they're evil, but because that's who they are. They are predators, and they see us as prey.
The only way to change that perception is to show them that we are predators too.
At what cost? Admiral Tanaka asked. If we use those weapons, if we destroy Vorthak Prime, what does that make us?
Survivors, Marshal Chen said simply. It makes us survivors.
The Hammer Protocol was implemented across the fleet in just under 18 hours, a testament to human engineering and desperation in equal measure.
Every ship that could potentially survive the atmospheric jump was modified, their crews briefed on the insane maneuver they were about to attempt.
Not everyone believed it would work. Not everyone wanted to believe it. But as word spread through the fleet about what the Vorthak planned for humanity, the graphic descriptions of previous exterminations, the cultural artifacts that celebrated genocide as a religious sacrament, resistance to the plan faded. They were fighting for their species, for their children, for the very right to exist. Against such stakes, even the impossible became merely difficult.
In the final hours before the jump, something unexpected happened.
A concordance vessel emerged from FTL at the fleet's assembly point. Not a Vorthak ship, but a small diplomatic craft bearing the crystalline insignia of the High Arbiter's office. Admiral Tanaka ordered it brought aboard under guard, uncertain whether this was an attempt at last-minute negotiation or some kind of Vorthak trick.
The being that emerged from the craft was not High Arbiter Vel'thari himself, but one of his senior aides, a species called the Maranthian that resembled nothing so much as a floating jellyfish made of solidified light. Its voice, translated through a complex harmonic system, carried a note of what might have been admiration.
The Galactic Concordance has been monitoring your preparations, the Maranthian said. We are impressed.
Impressed? Admiral Tanaka kept her hand near her sidearm. Is that the word you use when a species is about to be exterminated?
You misunderstand. We are impressed by your response to the extermination threat. We expected you to beg for mercy, to offer concessions, to try to negotiate a less complete destruction. Instead, you are preparing to attack the most heavily defended position in the galaxy with a fleet that is outnumbered 40-1.
50-1, actually. Our intelligence was updated.
Even more impressive then, the Maranthian drifted closer, its internal lights pulsing in complex patterns. For 10,000 years, the Vorthak have maintained their dominance through the same strategy. They identify a species they consider a threat, declare HFY, and then wait for their target to collapse into panic and despair. When the species begs for mercy, the Vorthak grant them a choice: complete submission and reduction to slave status, or extinction.
Every single species has chosen submission.
And humanity is different?
Humanity is unprecedented. You are the first species in recorded history to accept the HFY and immediately begin planning an offensive operation. You are the first species to look at certain death and say, "We'll take our chances." The Concordance has been watching humanity for decades, but we never truly understood you until this moment.
Admiral Tanaka crossed her arms. Is there a point to this visit, or are you just here to compliment us before we die?
There is a point. The Maranthian produced a small device from somewhere within its luminous form. The Galactic Concordance cannot officially intervene in a HFY. It is against our founding charter, against everything we stand for. But there are many species who have long resented Vorthak dominance, who have dreamed of a day when someone would finally stand against them. Those species have asked me to deliver this gift.
Admiral Tanaka took the device cautiously. It appeared to be a data crystal of some kind. What is it?
Complete intelligence on Vorthak defensive systems, fleet dispositions, and strategic weaknesses. Information that has been gathered by dozens of species over thousands of years, compiled and updated continuously. Information that the Vorthak believed to be secret. The Maranthians' lights pulsed in what might have been amusement. They are about to discover that their secrets are not as well kept as they believed.
Why? Admiral Tanaka asked. Why would you help us? If the Vorthak win, they'll destroy any species that assisted humanity. If the Vorthak win, they will eventually come for all of us anyway. Their hunger for dominance knows no bounds. But if humanity wins, or even if you merely prove that the Vorthak can be hurt, can be challenged, can be made to bleed, then the galaxy will never be the same. You will have proven that no empire, no matter how ancient or powerful, is truly invincible. The Maranthian began to drift back toward its craft. Good luck, Admiral.
The hopes of more species than you know rest upon your shoulders today.
The fleet jumped.
One moment, the assembled vessels of humanity's navy were positioned in the cold void between stars. The next, alarms blared across every bridge as reality itself seemed to shudder and tear. Ships that had been traveling smoothly through the non-space of FTL suddenly found themselves caught in the massive gravity well of a living planet, their drives screaming in protest as they attempted to compensate for forces they were never designed to handle.
Admiral Tanaka gripped her command chair as the indomitable will shook like a toy in the hands of an angry child. Through the bridge viewports, she could see nothing but fire, the hull of her ship glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction as they plunged through Vorthax Prime's upper atmosphere at speeds that should have been instantly fatal.
"Status report," she shouted over the cacophony.
Multiple hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Engineering reports catastrophic damage to secondary power systems. We've lost communication with 40% of the fleet.
"Do we still have weapons?"
Weapons are operational, Admiral.
"Then we're still in the fight."
The ship lurched as it finally stabilized, its velocity bleeding off as the automatic systems fought to keep them from plunging into the planet's surface. Through the clearing viewports, Admiral Tanaka got her first look at Vorthax Prime from inside its atmosphere. It was beautiful. Mountains that made Everest look like a hill rose from vast purple oceans. Cities of crystallized chitin sprawled across continents, their spires reaching toward the heavens. And everywhere, there was life. Billions of Vorthak going about their daily existence, completely unaware that the end of their civilization had just arrived.
No, she corrected herself. Not unaware. Not anymore.
As she watched, warning lights began to flash across the cities below. Ships launched from military bases, scrambling to meet this impossible threat. Ground-based weapons swiveled to track the human vessels that had materialized in their sky. And through the chaos, a signal was being broadcast on all frequencies, a Vorthak voice shrieking in what her translator rendered as pure, unadulterated terror.
All ships, this is Admiral Tanaka. Begin Operation Hammer. I repeat, begin Operation Hammer.
What happened next would be described in 100 different ways by 100 different historians. Some would call it a battle. Others would call it a massacre. A few, speaking in hushed tones long after the events themselves, would call it the day the galaxy changed forever.
The human fleet, reduced by nearly 40% from the jump alone, engaged the defenders of Vorthax Prime with a ferocity that defied comprehension. Ships that should have been fleeing for their lives instead charged directly at enemy formations, weapons blazing. Marines launched boarding actions against Vorthak vessels, fighting hand to claw in corridors that were never designed for human physiology. Pilots flew suicide runs against orbital platforms, their small craft loaded with explosives that detonated in blossoms of nuclear fire.
And through it all, the bulk of the human fleet pushed ever downward, ever closer to the cities below. Admiral Crixoth, whose ships had been positioned for the attack on human space, received word of the assault on his homeworld with disbelief that quickly turned to rage. He immediately ordered his fleet to return to Vorthax Prime, but the journey would take hours, hours that the humans were using to devastating effect. On the surface, the Vorthak population was experiencing something completely foreign: fear. For millennia, they had been the ones who inspired terror in others. They had watched lesser species flee before their might, beg for mercy before their majesty. The concept that they themselves might be vulnerable, might be threatened, might be killed in their own homes, it was so alien that many simply froze, unable to process what was happening. Others fought. The Vorthak were a warrior species after all, and even their civilians knew how to kill. Anti-aircraft weapons that had been dormant for centuries were activated. Citizens armed themselves with whatever was available and prepared to defend their cities. The military forces still on planet organized a desperate defense. But it wasn't enough. The humans had come with a fury that bordered on insanity, and they would not be stopped. Marshal Chen stood in the command center of the Indomitable Will, watching the battle unfold on the tactical display. By any objective measure, the operation was succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. The Vorthak home fleet was in disarray, their orbital defenses bypassed, their ground forces overwhelmed by the sheer speed and aggression of the human assault.
But she knew it couldn't last. Admiral Kriksoth's fleet would arrive soon, and when it did, the numerical advantage would shift decisively against humanity. They needed to end this before that happened.
"Admiral," she said quietly, "it's time."
Admiral Tanaka didn't look up from the tactical display.
I know. The warheads are in position. All we need is your authorization.
"I know," Tanaka repeated. Her voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of someone who had already made an impossible decision and was simply waiting for the moment to execute it.
"Admiral, the longer we wait—"
I said I know. Tanaka's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the horror underneath. Do you think I don't understand what we're about to do? Do you think this is easy for me?
"No," Marshal Chen said softly. "I know it isn't easy. It isn't supposed to be. But it's necessary."
Is it? Is it really? Tanaka finally turned to face her. "We're about to destroy a planet. 12 billion lives, Marshal. Children, families, entire cultures that have existed for longer than human civilization. We're about to end all of that. And you're telling me it's necessary?"
What's the alternative? Marshal Chen asked. We lose this battle. Kriksoth's fleet arrives and destroys what's left of our forces. The Vorthak resume their attack on human space. 20 billion humans die instead of 12 billion Vorthak. Our children, our families, our cultures, all of it, gone forever. Is that a better outcome?
There has to be another way.
"There isn't." Marshal Chen's voice was gentle but implacable. "I wish there were. I've spent my entire career looking for ways to win wars without massacres, to achieve victory without atrocities. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you can find the clever solution, the bloodless victory, the option that lets everyone walk away. But not always. Not this time." Admiral Tanaka was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "If I do this, I become the greatest mass murderer in human history. I become worse than Hitler, worse than Stalin, worse than anyone who's ever lived. Every child who dies today, every family that burns, every dream that ends, all of it will be on my hands."
Yes, Marshal Chen agreed. It will. And you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life. But your species will live. Your children will grow up free. Humanity will survive to see another sunrise. And someday, maybe, historians will understand that you didn't have a choice, that you did what you had to do to save your people.
And if they don't understand? If they condemn me?
Then you'll be condemned, and you'll bear that condemnation, because you're a soldier, and soldiers do whatever is necessary to protect the people they serve. That's the job. That's always been the job.
Admiral Tanaka closed her eyes. For a moment she was silent, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a curse. Then she straightened her spine and faced the tactical display with a new resolve.
"Open a channel to the Vorthak leadership," she commanded. "All frequencies, maximum broadcast power."
"Channel open, Admiral."
Attention, leadership of the Vorthak Dominion. This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Navy. Your homeworld is currently under the guns of my fleet. I have weapons in position that are capable of rendering Vorthak's Prime permanently uninhabitable. These weapons will be deployed in exactly 10 minutes unless you agree to the following terms.
She paused, letting the words sink in. Across Vorthak's Prime, across the galaxy, every being with a receiver was listening.
First, immediate and unconditional cessation of all hostilities against humanity and human interests. Second, formal withdrawal of the HFY Declaration, and recognition of humanity's right to exist as an independent civilization. Third, release of any human prisoners or hostages currently held in Vorthak space. Fourth, complete demilitarization of the Vorthak fleet, with vessels to be decommissioned under concordant supervision.
Fifth, war reparations to be determined by a neutral arbitration panel.
She took a deep breath. These terms are non-negotiable. You have 10 minutes to respond. If you attempt to attack my fleet or interfere with my weapons in any way, I will interpret that as a rejection of these terms and respond accordingly. Tanaka, out.
The channel closed. The bridge was silent.
You're giving them a chance, Marshal Chen said. It wasn't a question. I'm giving them a choice, Tanaka replied. The same choice they've given to every species they've ever threatened. Submit or die. The only difference is that I'm offering it to them this time.
And if they choose to die? Then they die, and I spend the rest of my life trying to forgive myself for killing them.
The 10 minutes that followed were the longest of Admiral Tanaka's life. On the tactical display, she could see the chaos unfolding across Vorthak's prime. Military forces scrambling to respond, civilian populations fleeing in panic, the first elements of Admiral Cricksoth's fleet beginning to arrive at the edge of the system.
At 8 minutes, a communication request came through from the surface. Tanaka accepted it.
The face that appeared on the screen was not Admiral Cricksoth's. It was a Vorthak she didn't recognize, older, its carapace marked with the ceremonial patterns of high political office rather than military service. The translation implant identified it as High Matriarch Vexonus, Supreme Leader of the Vorthak Dominion.
Human, the matriarch said. Her voice was calm, almost contemplative. You have done something remarkable. I've done what I had to do to protect my species.
Yes, that is precisely what is remarkable. The matriarch's compound eyes glittered in the light of fires burning somewhere behind her. Do you know how many species have faced the HFY over the millennia? How many have looked upon our might and trembled?
I know some of them were exterminated. I know others submitted. I know none of them did what we're doing now.
None of them, the matriarch agreed. They begged, they pleaded, they offered concessions. Some even fought in their limited way. But none of them ever thought to strike at our heart. None of them ever believed they could threaten us.
We're humans. Threatening people is kind of our specialty. The matriarch made a sound that might have been laughter. Indeed, I am beginning to understand that. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something Tanaka hadn't expected. Respect. You have taught us something today, human. You have taught us that we are not invincible, that we can be hurt, that we can be killed. This is a lesson we had forgotten long ago.
Is that your answer? A philosophy lesson?
No, this is my answer. The matriarch straightened to her full, impressive height. The Vorthak Dominion accepts your terms. We will cease hostilities immediately. We will withdraw the HFY. We will recognize humanity's right to exist, and we will submit to the other conditions you have specified. Admiral Tanaka felt her legs go weak with relief, but she kept her voice steady. Why? You could fight. Your fleet is almost here. You could try to stop us.
We could try, the matriarch agreed, and we might even succeed. But at what cost? Even if we destroy your fleet, even if we kill every human in this system, we will have lost something far more valuable, our reputation for invincibility. The galaxy has seen what you did today. They have seen that the mighty Vorthak can be brought to their knees by a species we dismissed as vermin. If we continue this war, we may eventually destroy humanity.
But we will do so as a wounded empire, surrounded by enemies who now believe they can wound us too.
So this is about saving face?
This is about survival. You have shown us that we are not the only species in the galaxy capable of fighting for survival at any cost. Perhaps it is time for us to learn from you, rather than trying to destroy you.
Admiral Tanaka was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'm going to hold you to that. If you break your word, if you ever threaten humanity again, we will come back. And next time, we won't bother with an ultimatum.
I believe you, the matriarch said. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing of all.
The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than any FTL signal. By the time the human fleet began its journey home, battered, depleted, but triumphant, the story was already being told in 100 different languages on 1,000 different worlds.
The Vorthak, the invincible Vorthak, the ancient terror of the galaxy, had been brought to their knees by a species that had only been spacefaring for a few centuries. The HFY, the sacred declaration of total war, had been answered not with surrender, but with an attack so audacious that no one had believed it possible.
And humanity had won.
Ambassador Kira Vasquez stood once again in the council chamber of the Galactic Concordance. The atmosphere was different this time. Where before she had sensed fear and contempt from the other delegates, now she felt something else entirely: awe.
Ambassador Vasquez, High Arbiter Vel'thari intoned, the Concordance has convened to formally acknowledge the conclusion of hostilities between the Terran Union and the Vorthak Dominion. We have also received a petition from the Vorthak leadership requesting that the terms of the ceasefire be formalized into a permanent treaty.
Humanity is prepared to accept such a treaty, Kira replied, provided that appropriate safeguards are included to prevent future aggression.
The terms you specified have been accepted in full by the Vorthak Dominion. Additionally, the Concordance has drafted supplementary provisions that will ensure independent monitoring of Vorthak military activities for the next century. Vel'thari pulsed with colors that indicated formal satisfaction. Is this acceptable to the Terran Union?
It is.
Then let the record show that the HFY between the Vorthak Dominion and the Terran Union is hereby concluded, with humanity as the victor. Let the record also show that this is the first time in galactic history that a HFY has ended in anything other than the submission or extinction of the challenged species.
A ripple of sound passed through the chamber, the alien equivalent of applause, rendered in dozens of different forms. Kira stood silently, accepting the recognition, while her mind drifted to all those who would never hear it. The crews of ships that had been torn apart in the atmospheric jump, the Marines who had died in the brutal hand-to-claw fighting on Vorthak vessels, the pilots who had sacrificed themselves to take out enemy platforms.
The victory was real, but so was the cost.
As the formal proceedings concluded, Kira found herself approached by an unexpected visitor. Admiral Kriksoff, who had been stripped of his military rank but permitted to observe as a representative of the new Vorthak civilian government, stood before her with an expression she had learned to recognize as deep respect.
"Ambassador," he said, his mandibles clicking softly, "I wish to speak with you before I return to Vorthak's Prime."
I'm surprised you want to speak with me at all, Admiral. You were quite clear about your intentions for my species.
I was, and I was wrong. The words seemed to pain him, but he pressed on. I underestimated humanity. I believed you were weak because you value peace, compassion, cooperation. I thought these were signs of a species too soft to survive in a hostile universe.
And now? Now I understand that these are not weaknesses at all. You value peace because you know the horror of war. You show compassion because you have suffered and do not wish others to suffer. You cooperate because you have learned that no individual, no species, can face the challenges of existence alone. He paused, his compound eyes meeting hers. These are not the traits of a weak species.
These are the traits of a species that has learned from its mistakes, that has grown beyond its primitive origins. We Vorthak never made that transition. We remained predators, taking what we wanted by force, because we never had to learn any other way.
That doesn't excuse what you tried to do. No, it doesn't. But perhaps it explains why we failed to see what you truly are until it was almost too late. He inclined his massive head in a gesture of respect. I hope that someday my species can learn from yours. I hope that we can become something more than what we have been.
That's up to you, Kira said. We can't change you. We can only show you that there's another way to exist.
You have already shown us. The question now is whether we are wise enough to listen. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Ambassador. The matriarch asked me to convey a message to you.
What message?
She said to tell you that when your ambassador accepted the Kethva, when she stood before the assembled galaxy and refused to show fear, that was the moment we knew you were something different. That was the moment we should have understood that humanity would never surrender, never submit, never accept defeat. She said that if we had been paying attention, we would have known then that we had already lost.
Kira thought of herself standing alone in the council chamber, facing the certainty of extinction with nothing but words and human stubbornness. She hadn't felt brave in that moment. She had felt terrified. But she had done what humans always did. She had faced the fear and pushed forward anyway.
Tell the matriarch, she said slowly, that we don't know any other way to be. When someone threatens what we love, we fight. When we're told something is impossible, we try anyway. When the universe says we should be afraid, we get angry instead. It's not courage, not really. It's just who we are.
Crixoth nodded. That is precisely what makes you so dangerous and so remarkable. In the years that followed, historians would debate the long-term consequences of humanity's victory in the Kethva War. Some argued that it marked the beginning of a new era in galactic politics, an era in which the old powers were no longer supreme and new species could rise to challenge them. Others suggested that humanity's actions had been reckless, that they had come dangerously close to genocide and should be condemned rather than celebrated.
But most agreed on one fundamental point: the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again.
The species that had once been dismissed as young, weak, and insignificant had proven itself capable of the impossible. They had challenged an empire that had stood for millennia and emerged victorious. They had looked at certain death and refused to blink.
And in doing so, they had changed everything.
Ambassador Kira Vasquez retired from diplomatic service 5 years after the war, citing a desire to spend more time with her family. In her final address to the Concordance, she reflected on what humanity's experience had taught her about the nature of the galaxy.
"We came to the stars hoping to find friends," she said. "We found instead a universe that often seemed cold, hostile, and indifferent to our existence. We were tested in ways we never imagined, challenged by powers that should have been beyond our ability to resist. And yet, here we stand, not because we were stronger than our enemies, but because we refused to accept that strength was the only thing that mattered." She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives of hundreds of species that had watched humanity struggle from afar, some with hope and some with fear. "Humanity's greatest strength has never been our weapons or our technology. It has been our refusal to give up, our stubborn insistence that no challenge is too great to overcome, our belief that tomorrow can always be better than today. These are the qualities that brought us to the stars, that sustained us through the darkest moments of the Kethva War, and that will carry us forward into whatever challenges the future may hold." Some have asked whether we regret accepting the Kethva, whether we wish we had found some way to avoid the conflict that followed. To them, I say this: we do not seek war, we do not celebrate violence, but when our right to exist is challenged, when our children are threatened with extinction, we will not hesitate to defend ourselves with every resource at our disposal. This is not aggression. This is survival, and it is a right we will never surrender. She smiled then, a tired smile, but one that carried genuine warmth. The Vorthak thought they knew what humans were capable of. They were wrong. The galaxy thought they understood who we are. They were wrong too. And to anyone who might be watching, anyone who might be thinking about challenging humanity in the future, I have only this to say: don't. We've already proven what we can do when our backs are against the wall.
Trust me when I tell you that you don't want to find out what we're capable of when we really get motivated.
The chamber was silent for a long moment after she finished speaking. Then, slowly, applause began. Alien appendages striking together, bioluminescent patterns flashing in approval, harmonic vibrations filling the air with sounds of respect and admiration.
Ambassador Kira Vasquez had spoken for humanity one final time, and the galaxy had listened.
300 years later, on the anniversary of the HFY War's conclusion, a memorial ceremony was held at the site of the Battle of Vorthax Prime. Human and Vorthak dignitaries stood together on a platform that floated high above the rebuilt cities of the Vorthak homeworld, paying tribute to those who had fallen on both sides.
The relationship between the two species had evolved in ways no one could have predicted during those dark days of war. The Vorthak, humbled by their defeat, but not destroyed by it, had undergone a cultural renaissance. They had learned to channel their warrior instincts into peaceful competition, their drive for dominance into economic and scientific achievement.
They had even adopted certain human customs, including, most surprisingly, a form of democracy that gave voice to all members of their society, rather than just the military elite.
Humanity, for its part, had continued to expand and evolve. The lessons of the HFY War had not been forgotten. Every human child learned about the sacrifices that had been made to secure their species' survival. Every military academy studied the tactics of the Battle of Vorthax Prime, and every diplomat, before taking their post, was reminded of Ambassador Vasquez's words: "When our right to exist is challenged, we will not hesitate to defend ourselves."
The speaker at the memorial was the great-grandson of Admiral Yuki Tanaka, a man named Kenji Tanaka, who had dedicated his life to the study of interspecies relations. His words were broadcast across the galaxy, reaching billions of beings on thousands of worlds.
300 years ago, our ancestors faced a choice that no species should ever have to make. They were told to submit or die. They chose instead to fight, not because they loved war, but because they loved freedom. Not because they wanted to kill, but because they wanted to live.
He paused, looking out at the mixed crowd of humans and Vorthak. Many died in the conflict that followed. Good people on both sides, people who were just doing what they believed was right. We remember them today, not as enemies, but as beings who were caught up in forces larger than themselves. We honor their sacrifice by committing ourselves to a future where such conflicts are unnecessary.
But we also remember why our ancestors fought. They fought because they believed that every species has a right to exist, a right to chart their own course among the stars. They fought because they refused to accept that might makes right, that the strong should rule and the weak should serve. They fought because they knew that some things are worth dying for.
He raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. Let us remember, let us honor, and let us never forget that the freedom we enjoy today was purchased with blood and tears and sacrifice. May we be worthy of the price that was paid.
Far from the memorial, in a quiet corner of the galaxy, an ancient being stirred. It had watched the events of the HFY War from afar, as it watched all things of significance in the cosmos. It had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of stars, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that defined existence.
And it had seen something new. Humanity, a species that refused to follow the patterns that had governed galactic history for billions of years. A species that looked at the impossible and said, let's try anyway. A species that valued love and loyalty and hope more than power and dominance and fear. The being did not understand humans, not fully. They were a contradiction, simultaneously the most peaceful and the most violent species it had ever observed. They built cathedrals and concentration camps, composed symphonies and engineered genocides, loved with desperate intensity and hated with terrifying passion. They were, in many ways, the most dangerous species in the galaxy.
But they were also, perhaps, the most promising.
The being had seen many species rise and fall over the eons. Most had followed predictable paths: expansion, conflict, decline, extinction. The cycle repeated endlessly, with only minor variations. But humanity was different. They seemed to understand something that other species never grasped: that the cycle could be broken, that the future was not predetermined, that they had the power to choose a different path.
Whether they would choose wisely remained to be seen, but for the first time in longer than the being could remember, it felt something that might have been hope.
Perhaps this species, this strange and contradictory and endlessly surprising species, would finally break the cycle. Perhaps they would be the ones to prove that intelligence does not have to lead to destruction, that sapience can be a blessing rather than a curse.
Or perhaps they would destroy themselves, as so many had before them. Only time would tell.
But as the being watched humanity celebrate its victory and mourn its dead, as it observed the first tentative steps toward genuine peace between ancient enemies, it allowed itself a moment of optimism. These humans had faced extinction and emerged stronger. They had been challenged on the deepest level. Their very right to exist had been questioned, and they had answered with strength, with courage, with an unshakable determination to survive.
They had proven that they belonged among the stars. And the galaxy, for better or worse, would never be the same. The last survivor of the Battle of Vorthax Prime died on a Tuesday morning, surrounded by 5 generations of descendants. Her name was Elena Kowalski, and she had been a 19-year-old pilot when the Kethva began. She had flown one of the first ships through the atmosphere, had watched friends die in the fiery chaos of the initial assault, had survived against impossible odds to become a witness to history.
Her final words, recorded for posterity, were simple. They thought they could break us. They were wrong.
In the end, that was humanity's epitaph, its contribution to the galactic record. Not a tale of power or conquest, but a statement of defiance. A declaration that some species will not go quietly, will not accept defeat, will not surrender their right to exist, no matter the odds against them.
The Vorthak had challenged humanity's honor.
And the human response had been immediate. It had been devastating. It had changed everything.
And across the galaxy, on worlds that humanity would never visit, and among species that humans would never meet, the story was told and retold, passed down through generations as a reminder of what was possible when a species refused to be afraid.
The humans had looked into the face of extinction and had not blinked.
And the universe remembered.